Hi, I am Michael Ingui from Baxt Ingui Architects, a firm in New York City, here to talk to you about one of our historic masonry retrofits, along with just how do we want to scale this, or how can we scale this in the future for other retrofits in other cities and other areas. So to start with Baxting, we were a team of about 24 or 25 people. My partner, Ben Baxt, along with a number of principals, one of whom is Will, who is on this project, an interior design team. A number of us are Passive House certified. And for the most part, we work on historic buildings. We work on buildings out of the city as well, though, and currently have a few other projects going on upstate Long Island. But for the most part, we're talking about some of our historic masonry retrofits that are in both Brooklyn and Manhattan. So here's Will Connor. He'll also be speaking today, but also on the team, you have Mary, who's working with Will, John, who's our Passive House consultant on this project, Andrew, who's the contractor, and Kramer, who is our mechanical engineer. So just to talk a little bit about the projects as a whole, these are some of the completed Passive House projects that we've done. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Some of them have been Interfit, some of them have been full passive, some of them have been Passive Plus, some of them have also been LEED Platinum or LEED Gold, and we've learned a lot along the way. Talking a little bit more about this particular house, this is a house in Carroll Gardens that needed quite a bit of work, but also had some really beautiful historic detail, which made it really interesting. It's also, as you can see, exposed on three sides, not just the front and back, like a lot of retrofits, but on the side wall. You can start to see what it looked like on the interior of the house and why keeping some of the detail was important. You can start to see, and which we'll get into in the future part of the presentation, just how we did some of this, how we held up the crown, why we did it, and we'll talk a little bit about the finished product and how the family's currently living in the house. A little bit of a before and an after, just so you can get a good sense of just the transformation. As you can see, the top windows were added, as was the original cornice. So in this presentation, we'll be talking about what did we learn, what would we do differently, and finally, how do we scale this, even beyond this map. So my first question to the group is, how do you embark on a passive house, especially when the homeowners want to get involved and you've got to convince them? Why would you do a passive house? So Will, I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I would say I think every client that we have that walks through the door would want to do something that's environmentally friendly, has low impact, and those kinds of things. But I think also the practical kind of day-to-day comforts and things is what's most important to them day-to-day. So what we like to describe in the Passive House is there's the five or six principles that Passive House adheres to, and then what those give those clients. And to run through those quickly, air tightness is obviously a key and principle of Passive House. For us, to a client, what you're talking about is a house that's well sealed against bugs, dust, and unwanted moisture. Balanced ventilation with heat recovery. Highly technical subject. Clients are good with that, but what does that mean for them? This really goes along with the air tightness. Once we've made the house really, really tight, we need to bring in air in a controlled and healthy way. So what the client gets from this is filtered fresh air 24/7. And a small anecdote from when we first started this, there was always this question about, well, can I open my windows? And you can. I think everybody knows that at this point, but it was this funny kind of thing that was starting to grow legs in the office. The next point is high performance windows and doors and proper solar management. Again, highly technical subject that our clients don't necessarily want to get involved in. But from their standpoint, it creates a safe and warm environment. And it's really, really kind of serene and quiet. And I think that applies to everywhere, but specifically for this house in Brooklyn, it kind of, from an acoustic standpoint, protects them from the street noise, from the garbage truck that drives by, the kids running down the street, and so forth. The next one is thermal bridge free design. For me, this means when you're sitting next to that front window, you don't feel the draft, you don't feel the coldness of that wall or the heat of that wall as it's getting beat down from the sun in the summertime. And then continuous insulation, which obviously with air tightness is probably the second most key principle of Passive House. And that just means the building stays cool or stays warm in the seasons without much effort. So you have less systems, and it takes less to keep it that way.
John, you'd be next. I want to talk about some of the strategies.
For sure, yeah. So in a world where we're sort of inundated with meetings, I'm actually going to advocate for a couple of really early and important meetings. You know, I know we're a little zoomed out in this world, but these are really important and super important in the Passive House process. And the first one would be a meeting with ownership to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all share the same goals. So with the architect, with the owner, with the Passive House consultant, to kind of go through the project, really describe what the process is going to be like, and to understand what the implications are for everybody, and to answer any questions they might have. You know, a lot of what we're recommending is quite technical, and we do our best to make it not so much technical. But there's a lot to understand, and we don't always think about buildings in terms of their performance, but that's what we're really asking clients to do. So it's important to really make sure that we're open to that communication, and that we're showing our work and describing exactly what we're going to do. Great. The second one, I would say, I'm not done yet, Mike. I'm going to keep going because there's two meetings. There's two meetings I want to talk about. I want to make sure we have a really early meeting with all the key design professionals, and that means that we have the structural engineer in the room at the same time as the architect, at the same time as the Passive House consultant, at the same time as the mechanical engineer. And now that we've been doing this for Passive House projects, I don't know how anybody else gets a project done that doesn't have this meeting, whether it's a Passive House build or not. It's so important to get all those key players in the room and talking about coordination issues, and really emphasizing the fact that this project, in order to be successful, has to be completely coordinated, both in terms of the drawings and the details. So that's absolutely critical, and it really helps us to set the project off on the right foot.
Yeah, John, I would want to jump in quick on that from the architect standpoint. I think we've learned a lot of lessons through how to build a Passive House that we now apply to any kind of project that we're doing in the office. And just to kind of reiterate what you just said, you sort of talk to the structural engineer and the mechanical engineer and the Passive House consultant and say, guys, I need all of you guys at the table. I promise you, I need you there, and something will come out of this. Structural engineer, you may only need 20 minutes out of this hour and a half, but that 20 minutes will save 3 weeks of us drawing something and designing something to send to you, only for you to tell us that, that doesn't work. I need to do something different. And it kind of takes what I think has been typically a really linear and slow process, and makes it a lot more efficient.
Yeah, I agree. I think it saves a boatload of money and time for the client, and heartache from everyone. So the next person is the contractor. Talk to us, Andrew. What are your thoughts?
Well, the beauty of the meetings that John just spoke about is it carries over onto the job site as well. Before every job, we like to get together all our subcontractors and their lead men, as well as even workers, laborers on the jobs and helpers, to just let them know what the do's and don'ts are when it comes to passive homes. One of the early problems we found is someone might breach the passive envelope, and make a hole in some of the membranes and not say anything. And that if that's left and not, fixed, which is really just applying a piece of tape to fix it, it runs into a potential larger problem down the road. So showing everyone what's involved in the passive home and bringing everyone, the whole team on board and letting them know that early notification or immediate notification if a membrane is pierced, whether it's by a plumber, electrician, an AV guy, or carpenter, we can fix these things relatively easily, really quickly too. So you don't have to be embarrassed. You don't have to worry about it. Just let us know that there was something that was breached, and that's worked out very well. It also brings them on board to a common goal, which is, creating this envelope, creating this bubble that we're all trying to create together. It comes to completion in the end when they're all together with us doing the blow a door test, and they get to see, the little holes that we're looking for to make sure that our blower door is reaching, a passive level. Once you go through that process once, though, it's something you don't forget, and it's something you bring to your construction site every time you go. And it bleeds through passive to regular construction too. I mean, you forgot how important it was to have meetings with everyone to kick off a job. And no matter how small the job is, it's great to have all the trades together just to discuss it and put everyone on the same page.
Agreed. Makes a huge difference. And then Kramer, you can jump in at this point, talk about ventilation strategies.
Yeah, okay. So, this is another one of those elements of the building that is super important to at least get started on early in the design process. The North American version of Passive House still requires some fairly extensive mechanical systems. They are much smaller than they would be in a conventional building, but you still need, active heating and cooling systems, and of course also the ventilation system that's already been touched on. Since we have this very airtight enclosure for all sorts of reasons, it's absolutely critical that you have early planning of your ventilation layout, where that ERV can go. There are performance impacts on, long duct runs, and especially in something like a row house, especially in a renovation, you need to be coordinating where the fresh air is going to come from and where you're going to dump the exhaust air. Also, a lot of clients still want a vented range hood, and that is something I'm, fine with. Not everyone is okay with like a simple recirculating range hood, even though that is a more preferred approach in terms of the Passive House envelope. But having knowledge and limits on what those flow rates are going to be, where that ductwork is going to go, where the equipment is going to go, what your hot water system is. All of these things are systems that are totally integrated throughout the house. It's not just a boiler and a water tank sitting in a mechanical room off of the basement. A lot of these appliances need easy access to the outdoors for fresh air in and exhaust air out. And having it, at least a rough concept of where this equipment is going to be located, how big it is, where the ductwork can run is super important to have sorted out early on. The further down the road you wait to implement mechanicals, thinking, oh, it's passive, it's super simple, we'll just throw them on at the end, really complicates and compromises their performance and the architectural integration of these, of what should be, very simple, small elements that kind of fall into the background of a well-coordinated house. If you don't get started coordinating those early, it just really complicates the process down the road.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, I think a number of the points that were made here help with one thing that comes up all the time, which is how much more expensive is it to do Passive House. And one of the key things that makes it more expensive is going backwards, or having people fall in love with things they can't have, or lots of the things that happen when you don't think about things like ventilation strategies early. don't include your passive house consultant early, and don't include your team early, as Andrew was saying. So I think, these are all really good points. As we continue on, this particular house was really interesting, and we were all pretty excited to sink our teeth into it because we had all this fantastic historic detail to save on a house that was open on 3 sides to make it even more interesting. So let's jump into that a bit. The first one for you, Will, is somewhat of an easy question, but we're still going to go into it.
Yeah. So the owners, a little bit of history of the house is it was purchased in the last couple of years, but the owners before that, I believe, had owned the house almost since it was built. It was a family that had passed the house down through generations, and finally got to the point where the oldest member of the family needed to move out of it because they couldn't do the stairs and everything. So that was actually a really important point for the homeowners. They loved the history of the house, and they loved the historic character of the house. And Mike, you had started with a slide of the front facade. They wanted to restore the front to look like it was when it was first built. And then when we come inside, the stairs and the crown and things were really, really important to keep. And so for us, this was a great house and a great example of being able to working with the contractor, working with John, and trying to figure out ways to make sure that we kept those things. And we didn't just take them out and then replace them with things that look like that or new things. So the picture that you see on the left here is the stair as it was when the homeowners bought the house. Obviously, they had covered the original floors, it's been painted multiple times. I think the house had been turned into kind of apartments at one point. On the right, you'll see a couple things. One is the stair never moved. We kept the stair in place. We kept the wainscoting. We worked and we tested the plaster that's on the wall. The right side of this picture is plaster on the brick, so there's no gap between those two things. We worked really closely with John and Andrew, the builder, to make sure that we were tying the sidewall air seal together to the stair. And frankly, made sure we tested it really early too, to make sure that the connections we were making were working, and that we could keep the stair kind of attached to the wall, if you will. And then architecturally, one thing I do want to point out, if you notice in the kind of top left of the original photo versus the top left of the existing photo, one thing we really felt strongly about was opening up the center of the house a bit and creating some light that's coming down through the middle. So you'll notice we kind of pulled the floor plate back and created an opening there as well.
Yeah, I think a couple other things to mention about Andrew, the contractor. A lot of people say, do you need a contractor who's already built a passive house? And our answer is very often no. You just need to have a contractor who enjoys building, especially carpenters. Andrew is that contractor. This was his first passive house, and he was doing it in tandem with another one he was doing with us. So that's one. But just in terms of just small things that are in this photo that have nothing to do with passive house. So that is the original newel post. That is the original rail. But if you've noticed, it's been raised a bit. And Andrew turned the bottom part of that newel himself on site, and actually created that that element that you see to allow that to be raised, because the original rail was really low. The other one is those are the original subfloors that also stayed in place, and they needed a ton of work to make them work. There's a lot of patching, a lot of new board with old board, a lot of really careful work. So again, you ask, do you have to be a passive house contractor? No, you just have to be a contractor who really, really likes what they do. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about this one. Would really be both John and Andrew.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. I think you mentioned like the key elements, Will and Mike, that there's this crown that's super important and visible. There's this stair, which is like so key to the house. And there are these floors. And that's what got saved. We didn't save every bit of plaster. We didn't save every small detail of the house. By really focusing on the things that were really important, we could, dedicate quite a bit of energy to those areas that were super important to keep. And then we could really work on the building envelope everywhere else. So I think it's important to like prioritize on projects like this, what's important to save, and where can we peel back to the existing fabric so that we can really have an opportunity to, you can see it in some of these photos, to really like do the building right by bringing it up to speed, by repairing the masonry, by getting a good coating on the masonry, by insulating the wall properly. And when we can do that and save significant amounts of detail, but we can't save all the building and still do the building right. We have to kind of prioritize. And I think the team did a really good job here. And you walk in the house and you feel the historic detail. There's nothing missing. But we also know that we got to the bones of the building almost throughout the entire project, which is really, I think, important from my perspective.
Yeah, on my side, I love the fact that homeowners want to keep historic details. I mean, this is the fun part of the project. You know, the challenge of how do you keep a solid crown like this, not remove it, hold it in place, yet also provide a passive envelope around it. You know, and that's where, you know, team discussions are very effective. You know, we call up John Mitchell and with John, you know, what do we need to do here to make this work? And fortunately enough, he has a toolbox of tricks and ways to make something passive. And then it's up to us to figure out ways to remove a wall below a solid crown, open up the floor above. You know, the homeowner has to be open to, okay, we're saving the crown, but we got to remove some of the floorboards above so we can tie our crown into our membrane. And so everyone's involved in making that decision happen. You know, it was never thought out beforehand. It was just like, we were going to do this and let's figure out a way to do it. And that challenge and that process was a lot of fun. And as long as everyone's open to it, you know, everyone knows that we're keeping this crown no matter what. And that's really what happened there. And it was a fun challenge.
And Andrew won't say this, so I'm going to say it for him. Andrew and his site super Billy are the ones who made all this happen. I was there to be like, you know, here are the principles. We need to tie the air barrier into this system. We need to use the crown as part of the air barrier. That's like all I said. And then I walked away. And then they figured all of this stuff out on site. And, you know, Will and I, in trying to prepare for this presentation, we're looking for our drawings of this detail. And we don't have them because we never drew it, because these guys did it on site. So I want to give credit where credit is due.
It's so true.
Thank you.
I purposely went to this. I feel like this is another one of those great solution slides.
I mean, I do.
Stair,
oh, go ahead,
right?
Andrew. Yeah.
I was going to say, how do you tie in an existing stair without removing it? It seemed virtually impossible. So finally, when we demoed the bottom of it, we're like, well, there's a piece of wood, a stringer, you know, that's running up against the masonry. Now, how do we tie in that piece of wood to the masonry? And it was a fun challenge that I was glad we had the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say for this and the crown, I mean, we started talking about the kind of pre-planning and the group discussions. And as architects, we want to draw everything and have everything detailed. I think contractors want that from us. But in these two particular places, having the team, including the owner, say, guys, for us, these two things are important. And then us as a team saying, all right, I don't really know how to solve this just yet. But when we get there, we're going to make sure that we have the time. We're going to have the openness to get this open and try to figure it out once we're in the field. Because honestly, there was no way to know what's behind that plaster when you pulled the plaster off, and how that stair really was built and how the crown was really attached.
Yeah. And then the architect takes all the credit. Next slide. Who's the contractor? All right, the next slide is a fun one, and this is all you, Kramer.
Okay, yeah, so as a result of all this great attention to, you know, air sealing details and insulation and high performance windows, that makes the need for mechanical systems much lower than it would be in a conventional house. The photo on the top left is a, you know, sort of average New York City row house that has what looks like, I don't know, 9 condensers on the roof. That's probably, 15 or 20 plus tons worth of cooling, which is probably oversized, but still, still quite a lot of capacity. But in the top left of that picture, you see the 2 condensers for another project. A house of this size might have cooling loads of 1 ton per floor. So, a 3 or 4 or 5 story row house like this, we can do on a single mini split condenser system. Sometimes there's a small single zone system added on to handle, maybe a top floor penthouse expansion that may have very different exposures. Like you see in the bottom left, that's a clear, strong west exposure for a penthouse added on to another house. That kind of space gets its own attention, a dedicated system, so it can handle the different loads. But still, it's 1 or 2 or at most 3 condensers that take up a footprint of 10 or 12 square feet, and can be placed either on the roof or out in the backyard, which is, at most half as big, sometimes only a quarter as big as a system that you would end up with if you weren't doing a high performance passive house enclosure.
So the next question, which comes up often, especially when we're looking at all this great historic detail that we put in, is how do we streamline this process, or can you streamline it for passive house teams? Will, I'll start with you.
Great. I think as architects, we've been pretty fortunate to work with a lot of great contractors, including Andrew, as some of the details that are up here, he helped us develop. But for us, there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, if you will. There's a number of different ways to seal the front of the exposed wall of a house versus an unexposed wall of a house. Liquid applied or membranes or plywood. There's a number of different ways to seal the ceiling. Same thing, like membranes or plywood. And there's a number of ways to seal a joist in this particular case for a row house in some houses we've replaced joists for whatever reason. In this house, for all the reasons we just talked about with the historic detail, I think almost all the joists stayed unless there was really some reason to take it out. And we had to develop a way to keep it. So for me, that's just a collection of details and a collection of methods and applications that, toolbox, if you will, that the contractor understands. And I think that's the most important thing, so that when they get to this point, they can decide what works best for them, and how to apply the conceptual methodology to put it into practice and get it into the house.
I think the one other thing I really want to mention is just the way Baxt Ingui works is we leave a bit of time in our projects to be able to be on site. So we'll spend a lot of time on the site working with Andrew and the team. And I think it's important for the architect to remember it's a team sport. And once you do the drawings, you still got to be there. And a lot of times, especially with retrofits, it needs the whole team there. It's good to have everybody talking at the same time. The next one actually was for John.
Yeah, there's a lot of what we do, like I mentioned before, is super technical, and it can be very specific. And when we're working with things like window details on a passive house project, particularly a masonry retrofit, they're very complicated. We have, in this case, we had, I don't know how many window types. It doesn't look like we have a lot of window types because architecturally and from the building side, it was all handled really nicely. But there are like all kinds of different frames and claddings and approaches to windows, different opening types, and having a way to sort of condense all that, or to distill all that complexity into like really simple, actionable information is really important. And I think I actually learned that on this project and it's maybe because Will got a little frustrated with me and was like, just tell me how much room you need around the window. And so, you know, eventually we looked at all the details and came up, well, the worst case is that we need 4 inches. And he's like, fine, 4 inches, it's done. And that's a piece of information you can hand to everybody. The mason can know 4 inches is what we need to offset the window. The person putting in the steel lintel, 4 inches above the masonry opening, got it. Everybody can work with that piece of information. Nobody needs to know about all the goofy technical stuff we're doing in the background to try to figure out why that is. They just want to know what to do and how to get their job done and do it well. So that's a lesson learned from this project for me.
You want to talk about this one, Andrew? This is that applied at multiple scales here.
Yeah, the roof was a great challenge. The roof, we actually pulled back the existing roof to create a deck, which you see the right 3 door units lead you out to. So it was a great challenge, tying in the passive envelope to that roof deck, the sill. You know, and that previous image that John was talking about, and his challenge of calculating thermal transfer was a great challenge on the bottom of those doors, and how to make a saddle on that roof deck that would fit the height we had, you know, satisfy the client's desire to not have to step up 10 inches or 12 inches to walk out onto their deck. They wanted their step up to feel like a step. So that constant redesign and discussion with John and Will really led us to new solutions we wouldn't have done initially. And that was a lot of fun, as well as tying in the skylights. And there was a lot of interesting things going on here, for sure.
A couple of fun things to note. This is the original pine floor that remained. It was never removed. And this roof deck used to be part of the interior of this house. Very often, there are opportunities in architecture to gain something really cool by removing interior space, and that's what we did here. We peeled this house back about 8 or 10 feet and created this roof deck, which was had a great view of the city and was really well placed, but definitely created that tricky detail.
Yeah, there's a small anecdote. There was just because the sequencing of the project, Andrew, if you remember, you guys had kept the original roof over that space while you were framing the roof and framing the doors and working at all the sills. So there's this moment in the project where we walked up the steps with the owners after you had taken the roof and the wall away, and it was like almost the curtain had been drawn back. It was really exciting.
Yeah, that was fun. We built the new roof under the existing roof, essentially, on the rear of the house, and then removed the old roof and the walls, and that was a nice reveal at that time.
Just to start on this slide a little bit, I think we've talked about this already, so I'm going to move on after this unless anybody has anything to add. But I think the one thing that our office has done, and I think a lot of the people on this call have really helped us to create, is a systematic approach for dealing with some of this. And I feel like a checklist approach of what happens first, second, third, fourth, fifth. I mean, it's never perfect for every project, but I do think a systematic approach is really, really helpful. It's just so easy in a renovation to miss something.
Yes.
Mechanical, Kramer, talk a little bit about mechanical, but also a big push to go all electric, how it's changed the ventilation strategies, and how we deal with hot water. It's a lot in one slide.
Yeah. Well, I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. You've got to at least rough out your mechanicals as early as possible. You can do some rough load calculations just based on approximate enclosure performance and figure out, based on the floor plan, what the zoning should look like, but what kind of equipment, where it's going to go, what the ductwork is going to be like, where your hot water heater is going to be best located, central to the hot water needs, or have an energy efficient recirc loop system. Again, your ventilation needs a source of clean, fresh air, and to be able to drop the exhaust back outside in an efficient manner. And especially in row houses, your places to do that are kind of limited. And all of these pieces of equipment have limitations to the length of the duct run or the length of the line set between the condenser and the various indoor units. And sometimes at the smaller capacities of equipment that we're using in these low load homes, those duct lengths or pipe lengths are also smaller and can really kind of limit where this equipment can go. So you've got to be thinking about that stuff early. And more recently, it's been great to see a lot more people moving more towards all electric homes, which usually the last holdouts are hot water and cooking. We have a lot of good options for heat pump hot water heaters now, including a split system like we see here that has an outdoor unit that can make plenty of hot water for anyone. And then on induction, it just really makes the ventilation a lot easier to deal with. Even if the owner still might want to actually vent the hood out, and there are reasons to do that, as I mentioned before, the need for airflow over an induction range is a lot less than over a gas range. So just by dealing with lower airflows, it's smaller ductwork, it's easier to provide makeup air, the systems are quieter, the systems are more energy efficient. But these are integrated throughout the house. So you have to make sure that they are kind of roughed out as early as possible so you can fit the ERV and its manifolds where they need to be, and the water tank and all the air handlers for the heating and cooling. It's never too early to start thinking about where mechanicals are going to be, but it just becomes increasingly too late and more complicated the longer you wait to implement or sort of at least get the concept of the mechanicals down, and one that incorporates the equipment we have available to us, because it is a limited range. It's getting better and better, but it's that it has to be very carefully coordinated, just like every window install and insulation layer too. The mechanicals are the fifth main component of what makes passive house.
Yeah, I have to say, in the passive house we did for ourselves, we are an all electric passive house, and love the induction cooktop. The heat pump dryer has been fantastic. Takes a little bit longer on large loads. The hot water has been great. We have no complaints. And I think what we're seeing in our office, passive or not passive, comes up quickly when we start to talk about the fact that we've got a lot of clients choosing purposely not to do gas. I think with COVID, a lot of people started to realize what air quality was. And so all of a sudden, the fact that they're bringing carcinogens into the house and they're dealing with their gas ranges, which their nose is right up in front of, they started to ask the questions for us. Well, okay, how do I get rid of gas? How can I just do a heat pump or a mini split for my heating and hot water? All of a sudden, well, you can, but you should also maybe then do a higher performing envelope. And it's been very interesting for us that people are coming in to this conversation from a very different standpoint, because they're choosing for health reasons to not introduce gas into their own home. Cool. So the next is, how can you ensure the transition to building occupancy goes smoothly? And I would say, as an office, this is something that we still work on quite a bit. And I'll let you kind of start with that a little bit on this one.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we're working on being better at. I mean, again, it probably applies to non-passive houses as well, but one of the things that we're trying to develop and make sure that we're doing with clients is create kind of an owner's manual or a maintenance package. So when the client moves in to the house, one, make sure that they know that the builder is still here and is still available, but we are too. And so that package includes all the kind of typical stuff like the as-built drawings and approved drawings and so forth, spec sheets for everything, for all the appliances, plumbing fixtures and everything, warranty and whatever. But I think the most important thing is actually kind of a walkthrough of the house and walkthrough of the systems. And that includes us as the architect, but also includes the mechanical engineer and even mechanical sub, to kind of walk through how the air conditioning works, how the ERV works, what are the kind of broad stroke concepts of what's happening when you turn that on. And to some degree, reiterating the fact that it's although a kind of high performing home, it's in a lot of ways a low tech home. It's being built and designed so that you can set the temperature that you would like the house to stay at. The ERV runs on its own unless there's some issue, and then it'll tell you. And it's kind of a dumb house in a lot of ways. And just walking them through that and letting them make sure they're comfortable with it is become really, really important. And then after the fact, down the road, checking in with them and seeing how the house is working. Often clients will live in a house where AC is not working as well as it should have, but they don't really want to say anything. And us learning about the systems that we're putting in and learning about ways we could have maybe done it better or done it differently, or what are the challenges that they're seeing now, I think is really important.
Monitoring is really for Kramer, but I also wanted to hear from both Andrew and John. We'll talk about monitoring first, but maybe Andrew and John give us some your thoughts on after Kramer talks about monitoring on clients moving in and recommendations.
Yeah, so it's this is the best way to kind of close the design loop on how we continue to improve these buildings is. As Will was saying, walk the owners through the house, teach them how it's supposed to work, but then also follow up and find out how well everything is working. On this slide is a shot of a system we have running right now where we're trying to diagnose some high electrical bills. And this is an E-gauge system where we've got a couple of dozen circuits being monitored, trying to isolate what is using the power and when. And it's looking like a lot of it is kind of homeowner behavior related, lighting and appliances and things. But this is how we break it down. You don't have to go this far with it, but at the very least, follow up with how someone's electrical bills are every month, and do they line up with roughly what you expected from all the energy modeling that was done? And if not, you've got to really get in there and figure out why not. This is going to be one of the big things is how we drive further improvement and innovation here is if you want to lower the energy use even further, you have to know what it's being used for, where it's going. And this is whether it's, owner behavior or electric heater got left on or the controller failed or wasn't hooked up right in the first place. Had that happen on another job recently where a thermostat wasn't put in and some electric backup heat had been running for months straight. And it wasn't until we were there and started hooking up some monitors and saw what was going on that we isolated that as the problem. So you've got to follow up, and that includes looking at the numbers, look at the bills.
So before we move on, John and Andrew, you want to give a couple of tips on how to make the move-in process smoother?
Yeah, I would just +1 to Kramer's monitoring recommendations. Like those are super critical. And anytime we've had homeowners install them, and it's a little bit tricky sometimes to get them installed because it comes towards the end of the project when nobody has any money left, regardless of what the project is. Everybody's feeling tight. But the installation of these systems is so important, and they've always paid for themselves in issues that we've found anytime we've had them installed in our projects. The other thing that I would say is we, I think, need to stretch our process out both on the beginning and the end a little bit more and understand exactly what homeowners are hoping for and expecting, and then check in with them at the end of the project and make sure they're getting what they hope for. We don't do a great job at that because we're sort of off the job by the time people are moving in and experiencing the home. And so I could really use a lot more feedback, and it would help us be better at what we do if we were more in touch with our clients afterwards.
Yeah, I would say letting them know beforehand and reiterating that, when you turn over the home to them and they move in, they're like, oh, great, it's my home again, right? But it's not. It's a special home. It's a passive home, and it has special qualities about it that you have to consider. You can't just go and take a 2-inch nail, whack it into the wall, and hang a picture. There are ways to go about using your home that's different than a regular home, and we try and educate our homeowners as to how they should be approaching these things. You can't call your neighbor who has a buddy who has a handyman who's going to come and remove something or replace something. You have to be sensitive to the fact that you have something special, and that it's a whole. It's not just, every time you touch one little area in that home, you can affect another area. And be open to the communication. Just as we're communicating, it's important to communicate with the homeowners and let them know, if you want to make a change, let me know. Give me a call. Let's talk about it. It's all doable, but you do have a special home, and we should approach things, with a discussion beforehand.
Great, thanks. So then we get to the end of the presentation where we ask the most important question is, what's next? What does the industry need most, and especially to scale the way we know it needs to? And again, Will, I'll let you go first on this one.
For me, I go back to one of the first slides that we were talking about, and just what the amenities are of Passive House. I don't think I know anybody that if you told them I can create the great house you're looking for, and it's environmentally friendly, and it does all these things ecologically, that they would say no to that. And I think families, clients, homeowners, take your pick, are looking for the practical and what the Passive House can give to them, beyond just the ecological. And I think it's there, so it's just easy to talk about.
John?
Yeah, I think sort of adding on to what Will's saying there, I think, we can maybe help people recalibrate their notions of, return on investment. And it's not just I'm going to put in, X amount of dollars to get this house, and it's going to be worth this when it's done. That investment that we're spending in a Passive House pays dividends in air quality and in the quality of the building and the durability of the building. This building that we've just touched, that was built in the 1850s, it should be good for another 100 years. That's kind of amazing, and that's a real investment in something important. So I think that's one way we can begin to sort of push Passive House a little bit, is to have people help people sort of recalibrate their understanding of that return on investment. And the other thing that I would say, maybe sort of along the same lines, is investing in people, in that these are, particularly these interior retrofits, they're very complicated, and they are resistant to automation. And there's not very good sort of software solutions to these problems. Everything requires a person with hands, skills, and a big brain to figure this stuff out. And so we need more people with hands, skills, and big brains on our job sites. So I would say, workforce development is someplace where we need to spend our efforts. And as great as the sort of technological approaches to high performance building are, I think we need to be realistic and say that there's actually like a very important human component to this as well.
Yeah, just to echo that a little bit, because I was going to bring that up as well as one of the items we really need to scale. Workforce development is huge and totally necessary, and a major opportunity. We have trade schools all throughout the U.S. who are looking for the next big opportunity for a lot of people going into trades, reaching out to them, bring them into this. This is a pretty significant opportunity, because we need this to scale throughout really the world. And getting the trades into this is both an opportunity and a necessity. Andrew, you can go next.
The trade portion of the project, of what needs to accomplish here, is paramount, but it has to be led by the material development and the economics of it. I really believe that if we can find ways to make these materials more affordable, then this home is a full home, top to bottom passive, but the home to the right of it, they might not be able to do an entire home, right? But someone might buy the first floor apartment of that home and say, you know what, I'd like to do some work on my home. I can't really afford to do it passive. The materials, sheetrock, compound, all these things that are common in our building have to somehow take on a transition to where when a regular person just installs it, it brings on some kind of passive element to it. We have to find ways to develop smarter, better materials. So Home Depot's, aisle of sheetrock, all that sheetrock and all that lumber and all that stuff they have there is going to create a passive home. And I think the work we're doing here is the beginning of it all. I think it's the most important step in it, of developing ways to build homes in the future where materials will be a lot smarter and it'll all be a lot quicker figured out. So we can get back to the point where a few laborers can come into your home and install the materials and boom, you have a passive home. I think there's a lot of development that has to happen from the manufacturers. I think they're the ones that could probably take this to that next scale. We keep figuring out ways to do it. They've got to bring the materials, just like all these great materials we have right now. They're highly specialized, though. They're very specific. These things have to be broader and in a greater scale. And I think we'll start seeing very big changes rapidly.
Kramer?
Well, it's hard to follow what's already been said. I mean, from a mechanical perspective, we're seeing better and better equipment coming on the market, becoming available as passive house and other high performance buildings become a bigger part of the market. There's still some areas where we don't necessarily have ideal equipment available, but those are kind of coming, and they will start filling in as the industry grows and the markets start to demand this, and as all of us start to demand, that we have just build better buildings, that we pay more attention to the quality of the work and to getting good tradespeople into it, and building this quality, and that homeowners are more educated about how much energy their buildings are using, what the air quality is like in them, because right now your average house, the energy use is miserable, the air quality is terrible. There's all sorts of long-term health issues resulting from poorly ventilated buildings, whether it be mold or mildew or dust or particulates and gas and all this sort of stuff. But we know how to do better, and we can do better. We just need to get everyone at every level, architect, engineer, builder, homeowner, renters and tenants and landlords, everyone needs to know that we can be doing much better with our buildings, and that we need to be, but it's being figured out, and a lot of it already has been. We just need to be doing more of this. It's not some scary, crazy new thing. It's here. We're doing it. It's been done. We know how to do it. We just need more people doing it.
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to just round it out by saying I think one of the things that we can all do to scale it is just to keep educating people. This conference is a great way to do that. You're just talking to your clients is another way to do it. It's just one reminder. A lot of people don't know to ask for this because they don't know it exists. They didn't know they can get filtered fresh air 24/7, so they don't ask for it. They didn't know they can get a house that had very little bugs or dust because they could have a sealed home or quiet windows. They didn't know they were possible. And we're seeing this all across, we're obviously this is a relatively high-end project. We're seeing this in the affordable housing as well, where people have moved into one apartment. A friend has visited and said, well, why don't I have this? And I think the more people are educated about what is possible, they'll start demanding it from the market, which will scale the market as well. So I feel just broadening that that user base by just educating them is really important. With that, I'd say thank you very much to everyone who's joined us here. You've got Kramer Silkworth from Bowcraft. You've got John Mitchell from bldgtyp, Andrew Fishman from SMR, and Will Connor from Baxt Ingui. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And if you've got questions, we're here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. How are you? I don't know if anybody had any specific questions or if anyone wanted to add anything in. Anything that you guys feel like we missed as we presented it, except for my whispery voice. I'm never presenting in the office again. All right. Well, I'll go in. Andrew, one question I was going to ask you, or I'll ask you, is as you look at it and you look at kind of, especially the completion of these projects and your crew. I mean, I know there's a lot of contractors who haven't done this before, who are jumping in and they're asking themselves, do I have to have something different on my staff? Do I have to just think about it differently? Am I managing a project differently? What would be your recommendation? Again, this is for scaling it. So what would your recommendation be?
Well, the biggest recommendation is to surround yourself with brilliant people like you three.
Well done. Well done.
It's the truth. I mean, your experience made my job easy. It was with, I don't know if you remember, early on, it was our first passive house project. And I told you, I'm hiring John directly, right? So John was hired by the clients, but I said, being my first passive house, I need to have a consultant on my team as well, even though he was doing a dual role. It provided for me the ultimate soundboard for everything I was doing. And so that was probably John's coming on as a consultant for us made me feel like there was no reason why I could not do this project. Yeah. So thank you, John.
And John, I will say, so we've done that with you ever since this project, with other projects, especially with some of the GCs who are doing it for the first time. I mean, are you kind of seeing that across the board as being something that's helpful for the GCs? Because I would say that's a biggie.
Definitely having some level of on-site support is super important, I think. I mean, whether it's us or whether it's somebody else who's just dedicated to doing on-site quality control, like that's another approach that we've seen on projects that works really well. As long as there's somebody who's going to pick up the phone when you call and answer your questions and show up on site and help work through details and things like that. I think it's super important. It definitely needs to be part of the team, whether we do that or whether somebody else does that. It's sort of fine with us as long as it gets done. Yeah.
Well, and then Will, I'm going to round it out with a question for you. Question for everybody. I mean, you've done a few of these now with us and helped us with our standards, but architects kind of getting into this, doing it for the first time, jumping in. Everybody hates risk. Any recommendations?
I think at this point there's a lot out there. There's a lot of groups. There's a lot of websites. There's a lot of things a lot of information. And for definitely better. I was gonna say for better or worse, but definitely better. I think the community is willing to share. Where I think even for us, when we started 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, there was already that was building. Was it 10? Oh my God.
Just saying.
So even then there was already people doing it. There's already people that had tried this and had tried that. And lucky for us, they were willing to talk to us about it. So I think just keeping your eyes open and putting your head out there is the way to start.
I would say that the two things for me that have been really incredible are bringing in the passive house consultant in early to the design process and including the passive house consultant in the construction process. So I've mentioned that passive house has really de-risked our projects, and I feel it on a non-passive house project. I feel it heavy. To have our project go through PHPP, to have John checking all of our, or Ed or someone else, to Kramer, catching all of our thermal bridges and so forth before anybody swings a hammer. To have that done, it really de-risks it for the architect. I mean, we'd be guessing, and kind of the same for the contractor. They're really de-risking that element to a certain extent because they're there looking over it, and you have a really good person kind of looking over your shoulder, making recommendations. I mean, nothing's risk-free, but I do feel like the passive house projects, it's nice to have that second person. So you go, John. I think we've timed out. So thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
You all, thanks so much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.